My name is Dave Link, and I have the pleasure to welcome you to the Basilica for the second annual program in the Reverend David T. Link series, Hope and Healing, the Promise of Catholic Social Teaching in a Divided America. When we launched the Hope and Healing series last year, we noted the series is a response to a particularly divisive time in our nation. We are confronted with polarization, intolerance, anger, and bigotry. We struggle to have conversations with our neighbors. Since we gathered last year, these challenges have only increased, further dividing our nation, our social and faith communities, and often our friendships and our families. Many of us struggle to reconcile our faith to what is happening around us. We are saddened and overwhelmed by the violence, the hatred, and the suffering of those on the margins. How do we as people of faith respond in these times? What does our loving God call us to do in living our faith and the gospel teachings? We are searching for hope, healing, and reconciliation. Within our Catholic and Christian faith tradition, an answer can be found in Catholic social teaching. Catholic social teaching offers a divinely inspired set of values and principles that define our relationships with and our connections and obligations towards each other. It is a framework for building bridges. Constructed on principles of charity and justice, we are called to see God in the hungry, in strangers, in the sick, in those in prison, and to give priority to the poor and the marginalized. We are morally obligated to seek peace and to work to make violence less likely. We recognize the dignity of work. We are called to care for our common home. All of this under a framework of solidarity and love. Catholic social teaching provides a path of hope, mercy, and forgiveness in faith and in solidarity with others. Catholic social teaching is about encounter and about right relationships, recognizing that we're responsible for each other. Pope Francis reminded us that the gospel tells us to constantly run the risk of face-to-face encounter with others, with their pains and with their pleas and with their joy. He championed what he called a revolution of tenderness, reminding us that we all suffer and rejoice together, and that we need to embrace all of humanity without exception. The Hope and Healing series is the inspiration of Father Griffith in response to our search for hope and healing. The Hope and Healing series will provide events featuring national and international thought and community leaders, Catholic and non-Catholic, addressing significant social issues of our time. Speakers will provide constructive discussion and offer ideas that seek to build bridges and to overcome harms of our broken and polarized communities. Before Father Daniel introduces Dr. Wu and we get to tonight's discussion, I want to humbly acknowledge that the Hope and Healing series is dedicated in honor of my late father, the Reverend David T. Link. Although Father Daniel never met my father, he suggested that the Hope and Healing series be dedicated to the memory of my father in recognition of his life of accomplishments, leadership, and service. I am forever grateful. For those who are not familiar with my father's story, let me take a couple of minutes just to tell you a little bit about him. First, let me say that my sisters and I have been truly blessed to be raised by remarkable parents. I've never had to look beyond my parents for inspiration, for heroes, or for role models. A beautiful and lifelong partnership between Dad's boundless and enduring optimism and Mom's gentle and humble grace, each of them dedicated to faith, generosity, and service, led to shared accomplishments, and together they had a lasting impact on everyone they met. After graduating from Notre Dame Law School, Dad led an accomplished legal career, first with the U.S. Navy and the Justice Department before practicing at a large law firm in Chicago. He returned to Notre Dame Law School where he taught ethics and served 24 years as dean. He became the founding president of the University of Notre Dame, Australia. He served as the first dean of the University of St. Thomas School of Law. He was a sought-after speaker and advisor here and abroad. He was a teacher, an advocate for compassion, justice, and service. But Dad's legacy, and Mom's, was truly defined by Dad's selfless service and dedicated to peace initiatives, advocacy for human and civil rights, and care for those less fortunate. He was central to establishing the Center for Homelessness in South Bend, Indiana. He passionately served with Habitat for Humanity. He became a student of and advocate for restorative justice practices. He was a leader in peace and healing initiatives around the world. And when Dad retired from teaching, his work turned almost exclusively to faith and service. Mom encouraged Dad to begin a post-retirement career as a minister in prisons in northern Indiana. When Mom passed shortly thereafter, Dad was called to enter the Catholic seminary. He was ordained a Catholic priest at the age of 71 and spent his remaining years in perhaps his most passionate and meaningful service as priest, advocate, counselor, and friend to many in prison. He was deeply loved by friends and family, and Dad's legacy lies with the people he reached, and he reached many. The Hope and Healing series is a fitting celebration of my father's legacy. His passion for justice, compassion, and service to those less fortunate is the very essence of Catholic social teaching. His life was one dedicated to pursuit of hope and healing. I'm deeply honored that Father Daniel saw fit to recognize Dad's legacy through the dedication of the Hope and Healing series. And we are honored and privileged to have Dr. Carolyn Wu as our accomplished speaker tonight as we continue the Hope and Healing series. And now I'll have Father come up and kind of say a few remarks and introduce our speaker and a couple of pieces of formality.
Thank you to David and Susan for their wonderful support of this lecture series. I would have liked to have known Father Link, and I'm inspired by his service. I just want to do a couple of things. Just first of all, logistically, Izzy Peters is doing a great job. She's my assistant and it was bartender and logistics, and she is going to pass out note cards that questions can be written on and pens. So if you could discreetly raise your hand throughout the Dr. Wu's lecture, and and Izzy will see you and come around. I think she's passing them out now, so that is a wonderful thing. Last year we had President Robert Vischer and Dean Marcus Cole. President Vischer is president of St. Thomas University and also longtime dean of our St. Thomas Law School, and he and Maureen are here. And so we thank them. Dean Marcus Cole, it was a great kickoff to the lecture series last year. And we are equally happy, even more happy, coming from Notre Dame again, to have Dr. Carolyn Wu with us, and I'll get to an introduction in just a minute. So thank you. Next year, we hope to have Sister Raffaella Petrini, who is president of the Vatican City State, friend of Johann von Pers, and we're in communication with her office. It would be remarkable if she could give our third lecture, so maybe say a prayer that can happen. It would be wonderful. There was a wonderful column by Michael Sean Winters in NCR about a 40-year run for a lecture series in Australia. And while we may not get people as far-flung as they did, it was very inspiring to see that lecture series and the people it brought together to have conversations like we're going to have this evening, led by mostly lay Catholic and clergy as well, compelling talks exhorting us to really draw from the waters of our faith, draw from Catholic social teaching to build a more just society. So maybe 40 years hence, right? David and I won't be here, I don't think. Maybe Susan will be. But this might be still going. I think that's something to pray for and to look forward to. In a highly polarized society, we are called to enter into dialogue. We are called to be bridge builders, like our new Pope, Pope Leo, has called disciples to build bridges across all sorts of different categories. Catholic social teaching is an ethical framework that finds its foundation in faith and reason with the goal of fostering a more just and humane social order. to promote personal and collective flourishing. And boy, we need a lot of work in that regard. I think we are all open-eyed about the work that has to be done. The beauty of Catholic social teaching is that it transcends political party and ideology. It can truly build bridges through dialogue, open hearts, and open minds. And I think one of the things that I would note from Pope Benedict XVI in Deus Caritas Est, God is Love, it's a remarkable document. And there's a beautiful section where he talks about the ministry of caritas, of charity and justice, is as integral to the mission of the church as preaching the gospel and celebrating the sacraments. And he says this is an opus proprium for the church, a task agreeable to her. And the lives of the saints, St. Vincent de Paul just the other day, attest to the great care and love for the poor and marginalized and building a more just and humane social order. Our speaker this evening has embodied the values, the vision of Catholic social teaching, compassion, reason, intelligence, humanity, and is a remarkable educator and leader. And I do want to note her book here, Rising, Learning from Women's Leadership in Catholic Ministries. And I want to thank our good friend Ellen Koenig. She had some of these at her home and brought them. Ellen and her husband are here this evening. And I think her intent, of course, was to just give them out, which is a noble intent. My intent as a pastor and heading up is to maybe ask for a donation. So you can go with either her route or my route, whatever you're feeling. But the tricky thing is, I think these were supposed to be, invite people to take a book and maybe invite them to make a donation to the Link Lecture Series. But we have our St. Thomas QR code up there. So we'll figure it all out in the end. But you're welcome to take a book. You don't have to do a donation. They're free. And tomorrow, Carolyn will be giving a talk on the contents and stories of this book at our chapel, St. Joseph Chapel, at 9 a.m. You're welcome to come back. Okay, now to our introduction. And again, thank you for your presence this evening. It means a lot, I know, to David and Susan and the Link family. My hope is, as I said, that this will continue on and continue to inspire and inform all of us as we take up our duty to live lives of faith and to live lives of discipleship in our world. We are pleased and honored to welcome Carolyn Wu, PhD, to the Basilica of St. Mary as guest speaker for our second annual Hope and Healing series dedicated to the memory of Reverend David Link. Dr. Wu is a well-respected educator, speaker, and organizational thought leader. She is committed to serving those on the margins, working for justice, and caring for our common home. During the period of 2012 to 2016, Dr. Wu served as president and CEO of Catholic Relief Services, the official international humanitarian agency of the Catholic community in the United States, and she served with distinction. Prior to coming to CRS, Dr. Wu served for 14 years as Dean of the University of Notre Dame's Mendoza College of Business. During her tenure, the Mendoza College was frequently recognized as among the nation's leading business schools in ethics and education. Prior to the University of Notre Dame, Dr. Wu served as Associate Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs at Purdue University. Dr. Wu was born and raised in Hong Kong. She was educated by the Maryknoll Sisters and immigrated to the United States to attend Purdue. Her academic work, leadership, and contributions to the Catholic Church have been recognized through numerous awards and honorary degrees. She continues to speak regularly on social and faith issues and serve on numerous boards and councils. Dr. Wu was one of the 5 presenters in Rome at the release of Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si on the environment in June 2015. And she might have been at this gathering, but she chose to be with us Today in Castel Gandolfo, about 1,000 folks gathered to hear Pope Leo, and this is what Pope Leo said on the 10th anniversary of Laudato Si today. The challenges identified in Laudato Si are in fact even more relevant today than they were 10 years ago. Leo told an audience that included bishops, religious lay, Catholics, scientists, and government officials. He went on to say, these challenges are of a social and political nature, but first and foremost of a spiritual nature. They call for conversion. Carolyn, as we said, is the author of Rising, Learning from Women's Leadership in Catholic Ministries and Working for a Better World, recounting her faith journey and work at CRS. Dr. Wu is married to David Barkus. They have 2 sons. Tonight, Dr. Wu will speak to us on the topic of resilience, something we all need to hear, finding our way back to hope. Please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Carolyn Wu to our Basilica of St. Mary.
Oh, great. This is a great start. So I just want to say, first of all, to David and Susan for inviting me, and for Father Dan to host me. I got a tour of the Basilica, and it's absolutely beautiful. I just want to say tonight, I'm not going to speak directly on Catholic social teaching. I think indirectly the talk is about that. But I just want to say at CRS, we have a lot of colleagues who are Catholic. We probably have even more colleagues who are not Catholic. And together they would say, Catholic social teaching is Catholic inspired, but universally applicable. And in fact, in many of those countries, they could justify working for a Catholic organization because they said these principles are completely aligned with our own faith. So I just want to start with that. I just want to say this was not an easy talk for me to do for 2 reasons. One is that I knew David Link. Before he was Father David Link, he was Dean David Link. I was a new dean, a baby dean at Notre Dame, and he was very kind to me and took me by the hand and showed me the ropes. But on many different directions, because David Link is not a one-dimensional person or a one-career person. So not only did he mentor me as dean to dean, he was also one of the founders of the Center for the Homeless. And my husband and 2 sons actually got their exposure to the homeless through that particular center. One of David's activity was actually Christmas in April. And he took my husband under his wing and showed him how Christmas in April would be done. I think David actually was the founding dean of the law school at St. Thomas, so he started, Notre Dame would lend him out to different people to do things. So he did that. But another point of connection between him and me was that he was also the founding president of the University of Notre Dame, Australia. And before then, I think Australia only had one Catholic university, but his idea was sort of like a comprehensive Catholic university, and he started with nothing. Not a building, not a dollar, not a college, not a student. That would be about 1995 or so, 30 years or so. And today, the University of Notre Dame, Australia, actually has a law school as well as a medical school. So I just want to give you a sense of David Link. And, you know, I try to do something which is worthy of David Link, a person who really has so much faith and illustrated sort of like how he brought hope to so many different people I mean, of course, his last career was as a priest and also very focused on prison ministries. So for that reason, I had extra butterflies preparing for this. And the other reason was that I have done a lot of talks, and hope is a fairly frequent topic that I speak on. But I look at all my former talks, and they felt hollow. Somehow, this moment in our country, in our world, in this history, everything that I've done felt a little bit flat. So I had to start all over again. The topic hope is constant. It's just that my take and my interaction with this topic became more difficult. I generally don't like PowerPoints, but I'm going to use PowerPoint for the pictures. There are very few words. So my topic today is resilience. I change it to a journey of hope. So by the way, I'm not going to read everything on that slide, so you have to pay attention because that's why I use pictures. My agenda today is really 4 parts. The first part is about waking up. The second part about resilience. The third is on hope. And the fourth is on Christian hope. Let's begin with waking up. I don't know about you. Waking up and engaging the news every day is like reading an obituary. Something died. And some of those are very literal, such as the victims, the consequences of gun violence. And I offer my condolences to Minneapolis for the Ascension Catholic Church and the shooting there and the loss of lives, for the shooting of your state senators, George Floyd only 5 years ago, and of course every day, almost every day, there is an incident of shooting, and even for Adam Kirk, and so on. So there is the literal loss of lives which are totally unnecessary. But in addition to the loss of lives, there's the loss of programs and services. For me personally, the loss of USAID, and therefore the loss of significant amount of funding to Catholic Relief Services to serve the poor, that was very hard. But of course, there's also the loss of principles, the loss of decency, the loss of our norms. We keep kind of moving over the line. We keep on slipping. And so the losses that we have faced are multifaceted. And of course, watching the news on Gaza and Ukraine is just, you just can't bear it anymore. So I would say for most of you, and definitely for me, there's just a sadness. There's a sense that I don't want to hear it anymore. Before we turn on the news, we would say, do you know what's happening? And is nothing really particularly encouraging. I don't know whether you weep in tears, but definitely we are heartbroken. There are many things that we treasure. There are values. There's a sense of who we are as a community, who we are as human beings, which seem to be challenged over and over again. Of course, there's a sense that truth is also, in many times, being sacrificed. And I want to start there because that's a real place. I think whether there are tears of the eyes or tears of the heart, that's a sacred place. I'm sure this audience read Richard Rohr, who came up with the book, The Tears of Everything. And in the Christian tradition, we do have lamentations. I don't think that's where we spend a lot of time in the past, reading the lamentations, but they are very real. And so we are also in this period where I think we have to be in touch with our lamentations. And that's where I want to start, is at the lamentations. As I pray, particularly the earlier months, particularly in February with the loss of the CRS funding and so on, there is a sense of like, oh my Lord, you just feel so lost, like there's nothing, no handles on where we are. But then somehow one day an insight came to me, and that was that my work, our work at Catholic Relief Services and Catholic Charities always begin with disasters. If there were no disasters, we would not be needed. That's not where we go. Every aspect of our work is about disasters. So I've seen many disasters. We have board members from CRS, Karen and Mark Ronhorst here. They have seen some similar things. But that's always where we begin. You see the tree with a lot of the color bracelets. That's in Cambodia with the Pol Pot genocide, where those were the bracelets of the children who were left behind before they were executed. You see a war zone in the upper center part. I think that was in Gaza in an earlier war. You see land which is completely dried out. I've seen lakes which are completely dried up, and all forms of livelihood disappeared. I think the boat there is Typhoon Haiyan, where the wind at 195 miles per hour was so strong that these boats were lifted onto houses and vehicles. I've been to Iraq, where ISIS was pursuing and undertaking a genocide of the Yazidis. Over and over again, and I'm sure people who work in Catholic Charities can tell you of the devastation in people's lives when they come into the office. But the thing to remember is that that was just the beginning. And no matter how horrible that tragedy is, the staff comes in brokenhearted for the first minute, and they are resolved to address the issues. They are resolved to hold the hands of the people and take on a journey of rebuilding. This is not the end. And I reminded myself, you should be familiar with this. You know, this whole thing about devastation, it does not have the last word. And I want to share a story, a personal story. When I was asked to go to CRS, I was a board member, then I was to become the CEO. I thought about it, and I thought I knew nothing about humanitarian relief. I've never worked in that sector. I was a business professor, and then I became an administrator in universities. I don't know anything, you know, about poverty reduction and all the different countries where there are these issues. I don't know any of that. And one day in prayer, it was part of my discernment, it came to me and said, well, you may not know how to do the work, but you knew one thing, and that was my parents were also refugees. They left China first at the Japanese occupation, bombing of China, and then because of the communist revolution, they left everything behind and started all over again. And actually all my friends, many of my friends, come from parents who also likewise left their assets and whatever they had and to start all over again. I knew of families with 5 children who started in a 1-bedroom apartment. And I said, well, you know what success looks like. And you know that success happens because I was part of that generation, you know, all relocated, displaced, and so on. We went to school, we went to a Catholic school, a missionary school, got our education, got attitude, got opportunities, and not just I, but most of the Hong Kong people of that generation, they all went through the same thing. So what reminded me is that I may not know the work, but I know what success looks like. And I know how people rebuild lives. So that was really one of the major reasons that gave me confidence, is that I have seen rebuilding of lives. I have seen how people prosper out of nothing. I have seen families who couldn't afford school tuition and uniforms come off and children going to college and universities. And so that's what I want to begin with. And that is, however bad things that we encounter right now, we have to believe that it is within our capability to make it better. So it's about resilience. Today's topic, we're going to go from resilience and then to hope. I'm going to tell some stories of individuals where their life or their problem solving or whatever it is got them to the next level. The first is the statue of Mary, is actually the Blessed Mother of Shanghai. This statue is important because it was created when the Chinese Communist government prohibited any religious objects. No religious object. So the Archdiocese of Shanghai created this. And what they did was that in Chinese legend, there's a story of a very devoted woman. Her husband and her father were fishermen. And one day they went out to sea, and a storm came. It was a really ugly storm. And this girl decided that she would climb to the peak of a mountain. She would bring a lantern, and she would put it on her head. And when she does that, her father and her husband could see the shore and come home. This is a Chinese legend. And the Chinese also have these things about dragons, that they're bad things and you try to conquer them. So the Catholic Church in Shanghai created this statue in a form that looks like a Chinese fisher girl, a peasant girl, with a lantern on her head that happens to be Jesus, with his hands stretched out and stepping on a dragon. Now, if that is not resilience, I don't know what it is. I treasure this statue very much because there are no reproductions of them. I went to visit a bishop who was very weak, early 2000, and he was actually in the hospital, and he gave me this statue as a reminder when there was to be no religious object. You see a farmer there. The farmer is not exactly the picture of the story I want to tell. The story I want to tell is about Ernesto. Ernesto is a farmer, and by the time I met him, he had become successful. But what happened was that a lot of the farmers, I think this was in Nicaragua, was growing corn, and their corn crop was not great. Climate change had affected them, and everybody was growing corn. And he only grew corn because that's what his grandfather did and that's what his father did. The fact that there was no market for corn, and low quality corn for that matter, didn't face him. He just kept growing corn. But in the process, he borrowed more and more money. And in South America, Central America, there are these loans where the interest rate is 12%. Per month, all right? So when you have a bad harvest, you lose everything. You lose your land, you lose your cattle, you become a day laborer where you go from farm to farm, hopefully to get some work. Ernesto started there, and actually every time he hears a motorcycle, he would go and hide because only bank officers have motorcycles, and they were going to collect from him. He had 2 children. They would not be able to go to school. He was terrified. And that's when he signed up for a program that was funded by USAID, administered by CRS. I'm going to tell you some of these stories, too, about these programs, because now it's part of our history, and I don't want it to be lost. So he signed up for a program which is USAID funded, and what it does is that it orients a farmer to plant a different crop. And the new crop that he was to plant was papaya. He knew nothing about papaya. He knew nobody else who had done papaya. But in any case, he was so desperate, he would actually get free seed in the first season and hand holding on the ground. The field work was done by CRS. So in the first year, he got these free seeds to plant papaya. And CRS would help him with what is needed and how to get a crop. 75% of the seed that he planted generated a crop. In the second year, he could now afford to buy his own seed and pay off some of his loans. And so, but he decided that he didn't want 75%, he wants something higher than that. And he decided instead of planting seed, they would plant sapling. You know, and these sapling would be about 3 inches tall. So first, they would grow a seed into a sapling in the medium that they could generate. Well, this medium is basically soil enriched by animal waste, right? And so the women of that community got together and did a business where they collected cow droppings, all right, because that was very rich, and blended this with the soil that they could get, and there they germinated the seed into a sapling. And they planted the sapling when it was about 3 inches high into the field, and his harvest was 95%. So from then, Ernesto knew what he had to do. He also knew that a lot of his costs was tied up with pesticides, herbicides, and he decided that they didn't need it. It was very bad for the soil, right? So he canceled that, and he told those salesmen and say, go away because we don't need you. So he didn't do that, but he also determined that what he needed was a greenhouse. So he used his profits to build a greenhouse, but the greenhouse was bigger than what he needed, and he started the rest of the community in planting papaya, but also germinating the seed into sapling in the greenhouses, right? So he also therefore trained up the rest of the community. When I visited with him, he was very happy. He owned 2 motorcycles. His wife is happy too because she has a television, and his 2 children were going to college. All right? So that's when we talk about how do you really change the formula for people. That is an example. Below it is a group of women. We work with a lot of women groups across the world, in Afghanistan, in Central America, in Asia. Sometimes these women groups are actually the Legion of Mary. Sometimes they're not. So in this case, this was another community devastated by very poor harvest. The women were very poor. They were very poorly treated by their husbands. There's a lot of wife beatings in these communities. So in this case, the work, CRS work, again funded by USAID, was to get at water. How, if you provide access to water, I mean, there are wells, but there are water sources and so on, but you need pipes and infrastructure to deliver the water. And so also to know, not free water, but how as you get growing and enterprises kept going, at that point, how they could also pay water fees so that they could actually maintain the system. So in this case, this group of women, they had access to water. They were able to plant vegetables. Vegetables were sold into the city, so they had a cash crop and they had income. And along the way, they also didn't have to go to rivers to collect water. And so they had more time. And some of them chose to study, to become literate in that process. As they grew, their vegetable business, some of them diversified into making muffins and cakes or whatever. There is a group, not the same group, but there are multiple groups where they decided to use their earnings to do baked goods, like the equivalent of buttered donuts. And they sold it to the equivalent of police in that community, and they exhausted their inventory in 1 week because, police everywhere. If you watch TV, they have donuts, all right? I mean, that is the ingenuity. Once they have access to an oven and also the other goods. The group of women I met, and eventually across the way, several things happened. These small groups become savings group. They started to learn, instead of borrowing from the bank, how they could create their own pool of funds that they could borrow from at low interest rates, and they learned how to monitor and how to police that asset pool. It became learning circles about nutrition, about maternal health, about hygiene, and so on. So they became sort of like learning and saving circles. This group of women, when I came, they really gave me a royal welcome, which looks like a lot of pine needles. They just scattered it with pine needles. It was really aromatic, and that's their way of a red carpet for me. And they told me they named themselves Intelligence, because they said they found out that they could be intelligent, right? That they were not dumb, that they were not stupid, as their husbands led them to believe, and also the wife beating went down, because now they have income, right? Another story is a recent story. I work in a program, and we mentored an Afghan family that came into our community. The girl I mentored was 15 years old in 2023 when she came. She had gone to 9 different schools in 6 years, because they went through different refugee camps in 3 different languages. English was the last one. And she learned English by listening to a Voice of America. But anyway, she showed up. She was 15 years old. She was already a junior in our high school. And so that was about October of 23. By March of 24, she told me that the school was processing her to graduate from high school because she had all the credits. She did really well in science and math and so on. And she told me she's never written an essay before, like of all of her schooling and so on. Nobody ever required an essay, and that was new for her. So at that point, I called Purdue University. I said, this person has not applied to any college. We didn't know she was going to graduate from high school. And they say, do not let her graduate from high school. She has the right to stay an extra year. And during that extra year, she took courses in the local community college and dental assistant type of thing work. And in the afternoon, she did advanced credits. And now this year, she just started at a university in the biology program, right? So the whole idea of people finding ways, last week, I think, watching NPR, they had a story about a group of people who organized themselves. I think there are now 600 of them, who are called Civilian Historians for the Smithsonian. I don't know how many of you watched that story. It was darling. It was the whole idea that exhibits were being removed from the Smithsonian, and certain things about history were not allowed anymore. So this group of regular Americans, their job was to go to the Smithsonian and took pictures. They took pictures of every exhibit and created an archive, right? So this is resilience. It's really about human spirit at work. This is another story. This is the Fukushima meltdown, the nuclear meltdown. So I visited there. When I visited, we still have like counters in the different areas. They gave you the radiation readout. You know, it's highly radiated. And so we were at this community center where there were a lot of elderly people and so on. They go there and they make the most beautiful craft. Even though, you know, their whole community was just decimated, a lot of young people have left, they were there. They made the most beautiful origami. That was one of those that I took a picture of. But what really inspired me, and I couldn't forget, is that every Friday, there would be buses coming in from the city, and there would be these people who would leave work at 4 o'clock. There's a bus that take them, or buses that take them, and they would do the restoration work, and then Sunday they would go back. This was organized by Caritas of Japan, but the people who showed up were not Catholic. They were just people who wanted to come and help, all right? So let me just do one more slide before I go on.
This slide is old. It was a CRS slide in my file that says in 20 years, from about 1990 to about 2010, there were major progress in terms of development work. And this is the work of the collective development community around the world. But that because of ART and the distribution of ART therapy, mothers who were AIDS positive, 98% of them did not pass it on to their babies. All right? So that because the problem could not be solved if you keep on passing it to the next generation. But that because of the therapy and the access to that therapy, 98% of the mothers did not pass this on to their children. The number of children under 5 dying were reduced by 50%. Over, 2 billion more people can get clean water. And of course, clean water is a source of health. And finally, that was about guinea worm. We don't need to go into it. I don't know whether the status stayed like that. One thing I have learned, when I was 16 years old, I remember feeling very happy. I said, oh, now the world is in a good place. We learned from World War II. We learned from genocide. We will never do that again. Check. Oh, in America, we are fighting for the rights of women, the rights of minority. Check. Life is good. The world is ready for me to come in, and I like this. Well, I'm no longer 16. And the decades since the 16 told me that this work never ends. You have to do it, and do it, and do it. If you set the agricultural system up right, there could be a war. And when people are fighting, the first thing they damage is livelihood. They kill or starve the cattle, and they destroy the crops which have been planted. And you start all over again. So what I have learned is that every generation has to step up to do its work. That progress once made is not guaranteed. That it's like a garden. One way or the other, the weeds will come back. It's just a very organic process. But the other part that I learned is that with incredible human ingenuity and will, we could do so much. Right now may not be the best time, but when it's time, you'll be amazed at what can happen. So that's resilience. And we know how to do the work. We know what it looks like when the work is done. So then it cuts into hope. Resilience is born from hope. And hope is actually agency in action. What exactly is agency? I think agency is 2 things. One is a sense of responsibility, coupled with a sense of can-do. That's just it. A sense of responsibility, a sense that the common good is important to us, a sense that the welfare of others is not my business, right? And the other one is that we have the ability. It's really about 2 very simple things. What should I do? What could I do? Right? So hope is really about that agency in action. And hope to me, when I first joined CRS, there's a phrase that the development community like to use, and it's called Build Back Better. Like everybody in development knows that phrase. So I was a newcomer into that. I like that phrase. And by the way, I think eventually it also became Biden's campaign lingo too. But in any case, it existed way back. This whole idea in development is that we build back better. I like that. It's just so simple and so true. And I think build back better is about 3 things. One is about action. The other is about the change in our mental frames, how we think. And the third one is about relationships. I'll go into a little bit of each one.
So action. This is a picture of the Haiti earthquake recovery, and now Haiti is in a bad place because politically it's just the governance and the leadership are just not there. And again, one could just feel sad about all the work that is being done and not sure what remains, but the other part of it is that, again, we have done it once, we could do it again. And so I just want to showcase that work. When we say we take action, by the way, that's the cathedral in Haiti, what it looked like. But the building back better is multidimensional. It deals with housing, for example. And housing is difficult because nobody has land titles, right? I mean, we don't know who that land belongs to, and how do you negotiate that? Another problem associated with it, there was so much rubble, and heavy equipment could not get in to remove the rubble. Another complication is, where do you get the materials to rebuild? By the way, there are very clever approaches to that. I could talk about that later on. It's about rebuilding education, and in this case, particularly Catholic education, and not just to rebuild buildings and have the former teachers, but teachers were not well trained. So the whole idea of building back better is not just create the schools, but how do you actually improve the curriculum and the teacher training? Hospitals, and again, the old hospital was pretty awful. And that new hospital is absolutely wonderful, and it took a lot of the used equipment and furniture from American hospitals, by the way, and also created a wing for different volunteers to come and for Haitian doctors to be trained. There's also livelihood. And here, for example, how do you improve the quality of the coffee, or the quality of the mangoes, or the quality of the soil, or the quality of the land management, and also developing communities so that they could make decisions. And what you can see here is not just about action, because behind the scene, there's also a lot of what we call monitoring and evaluation. Always going back to see what type of impact, what type of result are you getting, what type of approaches would work, what would not work. So for example, we found it's very important to create livelihoods within the neighborhoods, because in the camp, they're given free food. When they go back to their own homes, they have to worry about how they would make a living. How do you deal with sewage, for example? It was never well managed, even before the earthquake, and now how do you create new practices and new infrastructure so that people would take ownership of that hygiene? So there's a lot of questions about impact, learning as we go, but the third part of this type of action is that you have to engage the local people, because they are there, and if they have leadership skills, they could address those issues. So how do you build up the capacity of the local people to be able to self-govern? I mean, along with it, there's also the issue that you want to reduce the risk for the future. So one of the fights we always had was that people said, your houses that you build are too expensive because you build it to a standard which is irrelevant to us. And we would say, we do not want to build any houses that would just fall on people when there's another earthquake, all right? So, but there's this whole issue of how do you reduce the risk and how you sustain the benefits as you go along. So that's just a little something about action. Don't try to read this chart. This is just an example of what we were trying to do with mobile phones. So ICT 4D is basically information communication technology for development. And this was just a simple idea of how cell phones would be integrated across all of our programming areas. And our programming areas are agriculture, food security, health, emergency, microfinance, education, water and sanitation, and peace building. So those are the different sectors of work, and on the columns out here is through the different stages of our work, for remote data collection, for providing education to people, how they use it, for example, how to use the iPhone for medical diagnosis.
how to use communication and training, analysis and reporting, and how do we track. So just a simple question of how do you use mobile devices, would generate a pretty comprehensive analysis. So people say action, is it like, you give bags of food to somebody? Actually, we're way beyond that a long time ago. But it's not just about action. It sometimes requires a lot of rethinking, a different mindset of how we look at things. For example, to look at people's assets, not just their deficiencies, because you go in there and say they don't have food, they don't have shelter, they don't have education, they don't have literacy on different things, their soil is not great. In development work, it's very easy to identify all of the deficits, but you have to look at their assets. They're a very strong community. They have a lot of trust capital with each other. They know how to do certain type of craft. They have a particular farming method that seems to work, and so on. So looking at assets rather than deficiencies, looking at people as neighbors, not the other. I think even as we work, we think about the marginalized and the poor as sort of like those who are marginalized and those who are poor. They're sort of like in a special class. It's like you're either human or you are marginalized. But the whole thing is to remove the type of barriers that prevent you from seeing people as equals or not as the other. To not just look at their problems, which is very easy because we're there to do problem solving, and believe it or not, people don't respond well if that is your approach. To look at the whole person and not just their disability, and to remember their rights. I mean, these are all sort of like framework of thinking, our mental frames as we approach that. The third one is building relationship. And just have a few pictures. I think David earlier on talked about we have to be in dialogue, and Father Dan said we are bridge builders. Before Pope Francis called for encounter, a Protestant theologian I like is Karl Barth, and he had a pretty dense essay on what is to encounter. And it just boiled down to be simple, and he said to encounter is to really see the person, to hear the person, to share. He said in giving and taking, we actually change the physics of that situation, to be with the other, and he said to be for the other. It's not enough to be with the other, it is important to be for the other, and all in a spirit of gladness. Because God meets us in gladness, we are to meet each other in gladness. So I would say right now there's a lot of call for dialogues with people whom we don't always agree with. And I think that dialogue could take a page from this. It's not just to be with the person. Are you willing to hear their stories? Are you really able to see them as good people, for example, not just what's wrong with this person? And also, not just to be with them, but can you be for them? So how we encounter and approach each other. I just want to say one of the things I can't forget is meeting with a Syrian bishop in the height of the Syrian war. And the bishop said, please don't let the world forget us. Right? And some of you read Simone Weil, a French theologian, philosopher, and she said, attention, if done right, is prayer. So how we attend to each other, how we encounter each other, how we really seek to know the other is very important. I also want to let you know, and again, don't try to read it, in a lot of the countries that we work with, usually there have been major traumas and rivalries. People try to kill each other. And the whole idea of peace building is important. And peace building is actually a fairly well-developed framework. It's not just, let's have a session, we all sit together, have a meal, and then go home. that peace building actually is quite formalized, well-designed program. But I want to sort of like highlight this. A lot of times, peace building require also developing programs for what we call binding, bonding, and bridging. Binding is to rebuild the person's self-capability. Because in a lot of these situations, they're hurt, they may have become disabled, they may have lost land, they may be in a quandary as to what they need to do. So first of all, the whole binding is just rebuilding personal resilience. Bonding is really building the relationships within that community. Even for that community, knowing how to be with each other. And then finally, bridging. So bridging is reaching out to the other group. So something like peace building is not simple. But I want to say something, and that is, in the news with the UN General Assembly last week, we saw that there was a dialogue between David Petraeus, US General, and the president of Syria, who was an Al-Qaeda, right? But for the two of them to be able to sit together and talk about what do you want for the future of your country, and how will you be open, and how will you deal with these things? So you have to think about Al-Qaeda and American general can sit down. But of course, you know, in that last week program too, there was a segment on Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, how they're still trying to integrate and to remove some walls. But that's good because, you know, it's about attempt. These things that lasted for decades don't go away because somebody say you must. I think Rwanda is a very interesting example too. So 30 years ago, we have the Tutsis and we have the Hutus and the Tutsis going at each other. 800,000 people are killed. Over these 30 years is, you know, different programs from the judiciary to sort of social cohesion work and so on, to not have Hutus and Tutsis, but just to have Rwandans. Some progress has been made, yes, and a lot of pains remain, all right? But this is a whole attempt that Rwandans are one community and not two different communities. I think, you know, it's interesting between Japan now and South Korea addressing the hurts of World War II, for example. So we see this. Vietnam is very interesting to me, and Cambodia. I was with a group of Cambodians, and, you know, 1 million people were killed by Pol Pot. And some of the Pol Pot political leaders are still lurking around, right? I mean, they're in the area. And I asked these people, they were the Minister of Health, the Minister of Education, and so on. I said, is there a priority to bring these people to justice, right? I mean, these people are lurking around, to bring them to accountability. And you know what they told me? They said, it's a low priority. And I said, why? They said, we don't want our children future to be tied up to this whole thing about, you know, because there's a lot of resistance and fighting and so on and so forth, to spend our energy trying to seek that revenge. We would just like to move on. We'd like our children to have a different narrative than the narrative that we grew up in. And that was really very powerful for me to hear that for their children's sake, they don't want this strife to go on and on and on. So I just want to say, if we say, you know, we're so polarized, we can't talk to each other, well, you know, in countries where they killed each other and they're coming back again. I remember growing up as a child, they used to say the Japanese, they occupied us, they were mean, they were crude, we called them names, and there were these names that they called. But then, on the other hand, my father would go to Japan to do business all the time. And I would ask him, I said, are you fearful when you go to Japan because these are our enemies? Oh, this would be in the 60s, the war was in the 40s. He said, oh, long gone, we are not enemies anymore. All right? So I think this whole peace building is a reminder to us of what can happen when we want it. The third and final thing is forgiveness. It doesn't matter what program we have. In the end, I think we have to be sort of to let go, to recognize the people we disagree with, they're not bad people. But there are a lot of different fears. I think fears bring out the worst in us. We don't know the stories behind people, but that to let go, to forgive, and to recognize that perhaps we're in some ways part of the problem. I think that unless we are ready to sort of let go of the resentments or the judgments, it's very hard to really get to peace. I think until we're able to say we care enough about the same thing, we could move on. I was also at a workshop where the mothers of Israeli kids who were killed met with the mothers of the Palestinian kids who were killed. Now, this is over 10 years ago, but both of those sets of mothers came together because they could share a common grief in losing a child. So forgiveness is what's expected of us. So now I want to cut to Christian hope because I'm about at my time. This is a sign for faith, hope, and charity. I like it because they're linked together. When they operate separately, it's not Christian. They have to come together. And we have faith, which is the belief in God. When we have charity, which are works for others, then we have hope. I think hope is definitely the combination of faith and charity. What is different about Christian hope versus just hope in general? First of all, our agency is from the Lord and with the Lord. We have agency, but that agency comes from God, and God is in that agency. The agency comes from a God who is all-powerful. It is not on us that rely, but we rely on God. The God who is all-powerful also sees, hears, and dwells in all. A few times I felt like I was witnessing a crucifixion. One time was a woman, she was Yazidi. She locked herself into a cottage. She would not come out of that hut, actually. She has seen her husband and sons murdered, and she has seen her daughters taken away. I thought that was what a crucifixion will be about. Another time in Gaza, I met a father. He had cancer. We were attending to him. He also had lost his home. And he said, well, the person you should meet is my son. He was about 14 years old, a lanky, skinny boy who had a stomach like a soccer ball. And that's because he had shrapnel in his intestines. And there was no relief for shrapnel. A Palestinian youth cannot go to a Jewish hospital, and Pepto-Bismol doesn't do anything. So there is this boy who had a stomach of shrapnel. And I just thought, oh my Lord, that's like a crucifixion. And I had to remind myself, that Christ is in the crucifixion. Christ is on this side of life, suffering with this person, and God is on the other side of life where he welcomes the person. I remember one time I was with people who were close to dying at Mother Teresa's place in India, and people were dying. The sisters would take them from the street and clean them and gave them a cot and put them in pajamas, but they had no medication. They couldn't afford medication. And I remember telling my board chair, Bishop Kakenas, I said, this is too hard to watch. And he would go and bless everyone. And he said, today they are with us. Tomorrow they will be with God. they will be saints. And that somehow, helped me understand, just people who are suffering today, tomorrow they will be saints. But there's no other way to deal with that except to see Christ in that crucifixion. So God sees, hears, and dwells in all. God knows the truth. Christian hope is not we in action. Christian hope is God in action. God who is alive, who is dwelling with us, who is present, is God in action through us. We got a chance to be part of God's work. And when we despair, we forget this is first and foremost not our work, but it's God's work. And we choose to participate. I used to tell my colleagues at CRS and say, people pray to God for all sorts of relief. Please send medicine. Please bring food. Please give us a shelter. Please give us a resolution. It doesn't matter whether they have a faith, no faith, of all faith, doesn't matter. They pray when they're desperate. They say, God, please send us help. And I said, but we get to show up. How powerful is that? That when people pray to God, that we get to show up. So I think we have to remember, hope is not a choice. Hope is God among us. It's just a matter of whether we choose to participate in that work. But the journey begins when we pick up the cross, right? When we pick up the cross. Ave Cruz Spes Unica. I come from Notre Dame, and the Congregation of Holy Cross motto is Ave Cruz Spes Unica. The cross is our only hope. And my very last slide, before I go into our prayer, God is good. This is a picture I took of a new home in Haiti. And as you can tell, the hope is very simple. It has wooden boards for walls, but it's built on a concrete slab and has tin roof, and can withstand hurricane powers. And the resident was so grateful. She's God. God is good. And many people participated in making this shelter possible. And this woman knows, by God's will, this happened. God is good. So that when we end this presentation about hope, in a world which is a bit dark, I think if the prophets are around, they would say, and by the way, I don't think prophets tell us about the future. They tell us about the present. And they say, as people of God, you don't look like you're living the right way. Right? But our hope is, I think it's in us too, because we are made by God. But our prayer is, our hope is in the Lord who made heaven and earth. So thank you very much for this time together. All right.
Thank you to Carolyn for a very inspiring talk. We have time, I think, for one, maybe two questions, brief. So if you have a question and you want to send it down, let us know. And I think the talk was exactly what, I can speak for myself, what I need at this time. And I appreciate you acknowledging the pain we've been through in the Twin Cities. It's been a very challenging time. And I think those in the Twin Cities are feeling the collective grief and really trauma. So thank you for
Well, in
your
our
kindness.
Christian tradition, there is this thing called lamentation.
Right? Yeah. Okay. You left them, they're perfectly stated. I do want to thank, we do have a question, okay. how do we change how we think in today's caustic, environment, and create solutions?
I think it begins with a willingness to acknowledge that people we don't agree with, people who didn't vote the same way as we do, are good people. They have fears, we have fears. We just need to get into people's stories to understand what drives them, but to really believe in the end that most people are good people. I think that's the beginning. What is the point of having dialogue if we couldn't make that assumption, first of all? I want to say the whole Adam Kirk thing, Charlie Kirk, was difficult for me. I didn't follow him. I didn't know I don't follow the youth crowd, clearly. But then I started reading some of the things that he said, and I was horrified by it. And then I listened to other things that he said that were reasonable. Either way, nobody should be shot. Nobody should shoot into a church. Nobody should shoot at a speaker. Nobody should shoot, period. But I remember at first I was horrified by some of those lines, and then I was really taken by some of the other good things that he did say. And I read this article about how now men is a greater percentage of those turning to faith rather than women, and that a lot of it had to do with this movement. So I would say I'm a little overall allergic to certain things. And I told myself, you need to read about it. You need to read what is capturing the attention and the imagination of young men towards religion, and you have to have an open mind to try to understand that. So I think for all of us, I don't know whether our polarization is as awful as are told. Like my friend, I have friends who are different than me, and they don't seem to be totally, kind of incensed and unable to handle. So I think that many people now have blamed social media. I think Spencer Cox, the governor of Utah, who's now out a lot in terms of a person calling for dialogue, and he says social media has hyped and amplified what is negative to the point where it may have distorted how divided we really are. And I don't think we could just take the statistics of men who are so lost. These shooters, they're very lost, and there's a great degree of insanity operating too. So I think that the first step is the willingness to be able to assume that we have enough in common and that people are good people.
And to be, as you mentioned, this is a big part of restorative justice work that we do, to be open to people's stories. That's when you learn about people, their backstory, how, where they grew up, what kind of made them, and I think people just want to be known, they want to be seen, and they want to tell their story, and so I think that's powerful too. I do want to say, as we close here, please pick one of these up. I had a tinge of Catholic guilt, so we took away the signs. Yes. We can all, remember the brains of men develop a little more slowly. And so, not surprisingly, Ellen had the better suggestion. But these are free, they're signed, and they're wonderful. And there is a chapter on Karen Roundhorst, who is here, and it was Karen who made the introduction between me and Carolyn that started things off. And so, thank you to Karen and Mark for all that they do everywhere. Their wonderful leadership. And thanks to Carolyn again for a wonderful talk. She will be with Chris White and others, our own Susan Mulheron, and also Bill Kavanaugh from DePaul. Chris White just wrote a wonderful book on the conclave on Pope Leo, and that will be available tomorrow at the St. Thomas Law School. 3 to 5, a terrific panel. Chris is here tonight. He'll give a keynote. And then the 4 will have a conversation. I'll moderate. That's 3 to 5 tomorrow. There's also an online version. So please come to the law school atrium. We're going to talk about Pope Leo, Catholic social teaching and restorative justice tomorrow. So again, thank you. We are out of time, and I want to thank David and Susan and their daughter who is here for all that they do. And what a beautiful tribute you gave to David at the beginning. Very heartfelt and moving. So if we could again thank Carolyn for a terrific presentation. And remember the book.
I just want to say a little incident came to my mind. Sorry.
That's all right. Yep, you got the floor.
A middle manager came to me, and he was very distraught. He felt like the leaders of the organization did not stand up for what is the right thing to do, and that there was a lot of rhetoric, but that there was not enough action behind that. And I know both parties, I know the leaders, I know this middle manager, they were all very good people, but we're caught in this, right now it's a very difficult situation on campuses. And this middle manager's great man of faith said, I'm really disappointed. He's probably a little bit bitter, and he said, it's one thing to own up and say we can't do this because we feel too many constraints, rather than sort of not do it, but say that, the usual organizational thing. And I heard him speak, and the last thing I wanted him to be is bitter. So I asked him, I said, right now it requires a lot of courage of us. And that courage is a muscle we're not used to exercising. We don't have a lot of practice in that. And I said, in this case, the leaders may not have demonstrated the courage that you would like to see. And then I asked him, have you ever had a failure of courage? I asked him. And, he thought, and he said yes. And I said, did you learn from it? He said yes. Would you do things differently the next time? He said yes. I said, would you want people to hold you to that act of a failure of courage for that time? So I think that's what we need to do for each other. I think that there are enough occasions to be discouraged, to find people wanting, for example. But I think courage is there. It requires some exercise, and we could learn from our own lack of courage and come back again. That before we judge others for that lack, we need to cut them a bit of room. So it's a difficult time, but I think this is where grace, and if you look around you, there's a lot of good people out there. There are a lot of people who are still generous and help other people. On a micro level, I think we have a lot of good examples. On the macro level, you throw up your hand and say, what's happening? But I think with at our own micro environment, we have to recover and remember the goodness that is in all of us. Thank you very much for your time, and sorry for...
Thank you.